So good morning to all you. Thank you for coming to this last class of the week. We are going to talk about Brazilian economy today. I think that perhaps you are a little bit tired, but tomorrow we'll have a day off, and I can see that your weekend will be very busy. You're going to be very busy, but I think you would like it. I hope also that you are enjoying this summer school here about Brazilian studies, on Brazilian studies. And I'm very happy to be here. I was invited by Professor Davidson Lopes to teach this course about Brazilian economy. It's my first time at the Brazilian course, the Brazilian Summer School. I will try to give a very broad picture about Brazilian economy so you can match with the other courses you are having and you can have a big, broader idea of Brazil, okay? And Professor Davidson Lopes advised me that he will come here to give you an advice at 11. So until that, we have 1 hour and 40 minutes, perhaps something like that. I will try to, my class will last for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, then we can have a break, and then, or 10 minutes, and we can start with him at 11 again, and after he advise you, we can come again to do our questions and answers, okay, or a debate, okay, we can open for the audience, okay? So, let's start then about Brazilian economy. When I was invited to come here to teach this course, I thought, what would I say to you? Because there are many, many problems, especially advised by media, that are going on about Brazilian economy, that we are in an economic crisis, then we have a high rate unemployment rate, and that we are trying to find a way to recover from this economic crisis. But as you have different background, academic background, you come from different areas, and perhaps if I show you many numbers and graphics that economists like, it will be a little bit boring. So I decided to start with what Brazilian economy is in terms of how huge the Brazilian economy is, and not only talking only about our problems. Our problems are coming in the end, okay? So, what we can say about Brazilian economy today, even if you have an economic crisis, a huge economic crisis, perhaps the second biggest one after 1930s, we can say that Brazil is still the 9th largest economy in the world. So even though we have a GDP, there is the amount of all the things we produces during a year, or in last year, 2018, sorry, we have a GDP of $1,008 billion. It's a big GDP. We are the 9th biggest economy or largest economy in the world. Although we have economic crisis and the GDP are not so high as it used to be 5 or 4 years ago. In the American continent, we are the second one, just behind the United States. We are, sorry. I'm trying to get used to this because this room is very big. I thought you'll be closer to me, but no problem. And here in Latin America, we are the first one. We are the largest economy in Latin America. So even Mexico is a huge economy. Brazil is still the biggest one, the largest one, okay? And we are the 9th industrial economy in the world. We are going to talk about industry during this class. We are going to talk about what is Brazilian specialized in terms of industry. But now I can say to you that Brazil is the 9th industrial world economy. So it's also an important marker in terms of industry. Next, Brazil. In Brazil, São Paulo state, that is in the southeast, nearby us, is the second large industrial hub in Latin America. It's only just behind Monterrey in Mexico. So the industrial production in Brazil is very concentrated, and São Paulo especially concentrate the second biggest industrial park in Latin America. We are going also to talk about this concentration during this class, because this is a problem of Brazil. The economy is very concentrated in some sectors and states, okay? And, sorry. And perhaps you already know, but we also are a big country in terms of inhabitants, population. We are more than 200 million inhabitants. The last census, the number was 208, near 209 million people. It's also the biggest country in terms of population in Latin America. We have 34 of total population of Latin America, okay? We are going to talk about, because the number of inhabitants, it doesn't mean anything special if we don't think broader. Any economy or regional power or emerging economy that wants to rise and be more important in the world should have a big population. It's important. This is something that economists like to understand better, because if the population doesn't grow enough, we don't have enough labor or people to work, or the population can be even older, and it should be a problem in the future, okay? But still, we don't have this problem. Brazil has a big population, and it's a good sign, it's a good number, and the population is still growing. Not as the rates that used to be also, but still growing, okay? Okay. So, we are also an important diversified industrial producer. In terms of volume, when we talk about volume, we can say that we are the 8th largest car market producer in the world. That means that we produce at about 4 million cars per year. We are 2008 people, but we produce around 4 million cars in a year. So we have a big market in terms of car production, okay? This is number of the Brazilian Ministry of Economy, is a new number of 2018. We have 31 manufacturers or industries that produce cars, vehicles, and unfortunately, these 31s are not Brazilian manufacturers. All of them are foreigners manufacturers. This is also some characteristics of Brazilian vehicle sector, because we have a big vehicle sector. We produce a lot of cars, but the manufacturers are not Brazilian. All of the 31 are foreigners, especially from Europe and also Asia. Okay? We are also the 5th largest textile producer and the 4th largest clothing producer in the world. That's also a good number, especially because we have a lot of cotton. We produce also a lot of cotton. It's not so difficult to produce a lot of textile and clothing. And also because here in Brazil, especially in some centers, in some urban centers that are hubs specialize in producing clothes. We also are going to talk about this later, especially contracting women workforce, especially in Northeast, okay? We are also the third largest producer of footwear in the world. We used to be the first one, but as we have the competition of China in the last 10, 15 years after we started opening our economy, Brazil is not the largest producer market. We are now the third one, but we have a good number also in this sector. We are the 8th largest producer of chemicals, the 9th producer of steel, and you can remember that we are having a big trade war between China and the United States about steel, so we can have sell more if this continue to strength. Brazil can be a bigger producer in terms of steel cells, okay? And we are the 4th largest producer of cellulose in the world. We have a lot of plantations, tree plantations in order to produce cellulose, okay? And especially in the Espírito Santo state and also in some parts of the Northeast, but we have a huge market producer of cellulose, okay? In terms of agriculture, farming, livestock, Brazil is also very famous, and also very famous by producing a lot of food. For example, we are now the first larger producer of coffee, orange, sugarcane, beef meat in the world. So we are specialized in producing food, agriculture products, livestock products. We are the 2nd largest producer of soybean, and the last numbers, data that I have checked, perhaps Brazil will surpass the United States this year. So it will be the first market producer of soybean in next year. Also manioc, I don't know it, or cassava. I don't know, how do you know this? Oh, sorry. Have you already eaten pão de queijo? This is the raw material of pão de queijo, so we are also the leader in producing this. The 3rd largest producer in corn, the 4th in banana, and we have many competitors here in South America because Ecuador and all Central American countries also are big producers of banana. And we are one of the 5 largest cotton and cocoa producers in the world. We don't produce too much chocolate, but we produce a lot of cocoa in order to produce chocolate. And sorry, I jumped about the rice. We are the 9th largest producer of rice also. Behind the Asian countries, we are the first one in Latin America and the first one in the world producing rice. And Brazil has the 3rd highest volume in credit to agriculture. If you look at Brazilian history, you can see that many governments give cheap credit to the farmers in order to produce a lot of food, a lot of agriculture. Big business, there are special credit lines, and also to familiar units, familiar properties also. They have special lines of credit, cheap special lines of credit in order to buy machinery, seeds, and other things like that in order to be more productive in the country, in the countryside. Okay? In terms of my mineral commodity, there is also a raw material, important raw material to industry. We are today the 2nd largest producer of iron ore. And Minas Gerais is the first one. You are in the state that is the largest producer of iron ore. Perhaps you are going to see tomorrow in Ouro Preto how Minas Gerais started being a so huge producer of mineral, many kinds of mineral. Perhaps when you are going there, you can see in the way you are going to see some companies and local where people produce minerals, okay? And I will tell you the ones that are the most, that we produce more. Vale, that was called Vale do Rio Doce, but now is Vale, the one that you have heard perhaps on TV after in Brumadinho, the accident, no, it's not an accident, but the tragedy in Brumadinho. Vale was famous, a famous company. And this is the first one in terms of mineral producer in enterprise in the world. Sorry, the fourth mineral biggest enterprise in the world. It's a big company, and I'll give more data about this. It's still one of the 10th biggest company in Brazil, even after this tragedy, okay? We are also the 10th largest producer of oil, of petroleum, and the 15th in oil reserves. Here in Latin America, Venezuela is the largest one in terms of reserves in the world, but we are also a big producer of petroleum. And this is why we have one of the biggest companies that calls Petrobras, that produces a lot of crude oil, special crude oil. We are exporter of crude oil, we import processed oil. Okay, we are also going to talk about that in this class. And Petrobras, after many political scandals involving corruption, is still the 8th biggest company in Brazil. So it's a state-owned enterprise, although it's an open to stock market. There are shares of to other people and also private ones, but still it's a state-owned enterprise and is one of the biggest of the Brazilian economy, and was established in the 1950s. Okay, it's perhaps you have already heard in the history class that Brazil wanted to develop its economy and wanted also to have a company to provide oil, process oil, sell oil to Brazilian economy in order to grow. And this is one of the most important companies that we still have, although you have heard many corruption problems that Petrobras have had in the last 5 or 6 years. We are the first largest producer and exporter of niobium, and the 5th of manganese, and the 11th of gold. And this is our 3, but we have many rare minerals that are very important to other companies abroad. Especially the Chinese companies are very interested in these rare minerals that we have, especially in Minas Gerais and also in Pará, in Northeast, Pará state, in the north of Brazil. Vale operates in Minas Gerais, but its main operation is in Pará. There are some states there that Vale explores a lot the production of minerals. Okay. Here I can show you. I don't know if you can see in terms of agribusiness and agriculture. Brazil plays a major role in 2016, but also now. In terms of commodity produced in Brazil, in million tons, we have sugar cane more than 700 tons, soybeans, corn, milk, cassava, oranges, meat and meat chicken, rice, meat, beef, wheat. Wheat we don't produce so much because we are important of the wheat. Bananas, tomatoes, potatoes, meat, pork, seed cotton, and coffee. Here you can see that sugar cane is historically, also speaking, we are a very large market of sugar cane. We started producing sugar cane in the 17th century, and we turned a big producer. Now, it's not only for sugar, to produce sugar, it's also to produce biofuels, okay? We are also going to talk about that. And São Paulo state also concentrates the biggest production of sugar cane. And here I have numbers about our livestock and meat production. Livestock, we have, please see, we have 232 heads of cattle. It means that if we are 280 million people in Brazil, we have more cows than people in Brazil. We have the livestock, in terms of million, it's 232. There are more cattle than people in Brazil. So we are huge producer of this, and we are responsible for 23% of total production, and we are the second in the world ranking, okay? In terms of cows production, Brazil produces 49.5 million, and we are responsible for 16%, and we are the third one in terms of this production. In million tons, 9.9 tons, and Brazil is responsible for 15. And we are the first exporter in terms of meat, beef meat. And the consumption, we are the third one. We are the third largest consumption market. I think that you have also noticed it, that everywhere where we go here in Brazil, in restaurants, you can eat meat. It's something very usual. Most Brazilians like, and like also churrasco. And this is also what we produce a lot of meat, and we also the largest market to export this kind of meat. Okay? Brazil's GDP composition by sector. I have told you in the beginning that Brazil is the 9th largest economy in the world. But what does it mean in domestic terms? What we produce in order to have this GDP, this high GDP? The first part of the first sector, the most important sector, is not industry. Look, industry is only responsible for 21% of the whole GDP, the 2018 GDP of last year. And agriculture, although I have given you great numbers, we are responsible for 5.1. The agriculture and farming is responsible for 5.1% of the GDP. Look at the services, especially commerce and transport and storage, and here we can include transportation, financial export, services, education, what else? Advising, many services that we are specialized, but industry is not a very important sector, services more. And even neither agriculture is a so special sector. It's special in terms of absolutely terms. In relative terms, it's not so big. Okay, and we are also going to understand that. This is one point that most economists say, that we have difficulties to develop our economy because industry that employ many people and that have good impacts in other sectors, in also in the workforce sector, is not very representative in this case. We are going to talk about that. That is why Brazil is still undeveloping or developing country, and it has difficulties to improve in this sector. We have, for years or for decades, emphasized our agriculture and our services sectors that don't represent so much in terms of GDP and also GDP growth, okay? In terms of energy producer and consumer, Brazil is the leader country in the production of renewable and clean energy. Perhaps one of you study engineering or environment engineering. We can discuss about this more after the break. But Brazil is the third largest producer in the world in this kind of clean energy. It's also an investment, a public investment and private investment that are boosting this number. We reached this position in some years, and we have high technology in order to produce this kind of energy. Okay? Renewable resources are now responsible for over 80% of Brazil energy matrix. I'm going to show you numbers, but here we can include many kinds of renewable energy and also water energy, energy produced by water. Or hydro energy. We are the third largest producer in hydro energy in the world, and the 7th largest producer of eolic wind energy. I also have checked this number is recent. In 2018, we have reached this number. So we have also surpassed Canada and other countries that invest a lot in this kind of energy. And we are now the 3rd largest producer. The 7th, sorry. We are also the 2nd largest producer of biofuels. In this case, I can say ethanol. Ethanol you can find in the gas stations here in Brazil in a price that is not as high as gas. And so we have the engine of our cars accept both gas and ethanol. And ethanol is produced by sugarcane or corn. Sugarcane is the most popular raw material to produce this kind of fuel, but also we have we are growing in terms of corn production. We are the 7th biggest energy consumer in the world. And here in Brazil, the companies are the biggest consumers. So especially in the winter, we consume most than in summer. Energy, and we also are growing in this production because we are needing even more energy in the last years, and we are the first consumer market in South America. So, if the population grows and also the industry grows, we need even more energy. And so here I can show you the Brazil electricity generation by fuel type from 2000 to 2018. Here in blue you can see the hydroelectricity. It's the biggest one since 2000. And then in the next one is fossil fuels, biomass and waste. And nuclear we have also, especially have two industries that produce nuclear energy, wind that I have told you, and the last one is solar energy. Perhaps you have also noticed that many houses here in Belo Horizonte, especially in the neighborhoods that have new houses, we have solar energy in the top of the houses. in order to produce solar energy. Okay, so I don't know if you have a chance, if you stay in Brazil more time, you can visit Cataratas de Iguaçu, and you will see the biggest company that produces hydroelectricity in Brazil, and it's a joint venture with Paraguay. It's very beautiful. You should go there. We are also an important export market. We are the 27th largest one out of 154 in the world. The World Trade Organization every year highlights the numbers of the biggest export markets, and Brazil is still the 27th. We are also the largest exporter of beef meat. We are big producers, but also big exporters. Beef meat, tobacco, sugar, chicken, and beef meat, soybean, and orange juice in the world. Perhaps you have already seen that Brazil is the biggest producer of orange juice. The juice goes manufactured to the United States and to Europe. And sometimes we have problems with the United States with the tariffs that they impose to our product, juice, orange juice, in order to favorite their production, their domestic production. But we are the biggest one in the world, okay? And we are the second largest exporter of corn after the United States, cotton after India, and food in general in the world. So we are a very big agriculture and food production. I have read some articles that say that Brazil, if explored its potential, could be the biggest food production in the world. And especially if you look at some other markets, like in Asia, for example, China is very interested in our food and also in our energy resources. Okay, this is something very special. We have to highlight this. And we have a lot of, a big area and different kinds of, perhaps we're going to discuss this in this geography class. We have different kinds of, to grow different types of agriculture, and this is a good thing. And also the weather helps, and it's something that we highlight because it's very special regarding Brazil. We are the fourth largest exporter of flesh and pork meat in the world. So you can see from this data that we are more specialized in exporting agriculture and commodity products. Sure, we have other sectors that we can highlight, for example, airplanes. We export airplanes. We export some products, chemical products, but the biggest part of our exportations are related to commodity and mineral commodities and agriculture commodities. Okay. We are also an important consumer. We are the 7th largest consumer market in the world in general terms. If you count electronics, food, beverages, everything, clothes, we are the 7th one in the world in terms of consume. We are also the 9th largest car market in the world. We are the 7th now. We used to be the 4th one. That means that we also buy a lot of cars. Every year we can see new cars on the streets. And it's not cheap. And also we have, it's even more common to see very expensive and imported cars in Brazil because there is an elite that can buy more modern cars and new cars and from new brands and with modern structures or modern vehicles. And so you can see that Brazilian people like to buy cars. I have read many articles saying that something that Brazilians really like, and they are, if they trust the brand, they always buy cars, vehicles from the same brand. And we are continuous increases of household consumption. This is something that we can notice if you go to different families here in Brazil, that our power of consumption has grown in the last 10, 15 years. For example, we grown from 2004 to 2016, 9% of buying pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. It's an important sector in Brazil, and today you can buy important products in the pharmacies. This is something new. Perhaps 10 years ago, it was even more difficult to find so many pharmaceutical products in the pharmacies or in the supermarkets in Brazil. Supermarkets, food, beverages, and smoke growth grew 6.5% during this period. Office supplies and computing, 25.8%. It's also a good number. Laptops, 10 years ago, many students didn't have. Today, many students come to the class with their own computers. And there are special brands that have a special price, and it's not very modern computers, but it's something that is very necessary and good if we think that in the internet we have access to internet, and also we can search many things if we have a laptop or a cell phone. This changed our lives. Furniture, electronic devices, 14.9, vehicles and parts, 11, and clothing, footwear, 4.9. If you look at, if you came to Brazil 15 years ago, we wouldn't find so many shopping centers as you can find now. If you go to a medium-sized city or town, most of them have a shopping center. This is something new in Brazil also. Brazilian people could buy even more with this kind of services and shopping centers, and they have access to things that 20 years ago they didn't have. So it's something also to highlight because it changed the way we consumption. An important consumer. Young people from 18 to 30 years old shop at least once a month through their smartphones, jumped from 19 in 2013 to 48. I think that young people are don't have difficulties in accessing websites and buying. Elder people have more difficulties changing their way of buying. They prefer physical stores. They still prefer physical stores. But something that here we can see that even if you go to a suburb or a neighborhood that is not located in the most important part of a city where people don't have a good salary, even there you can see that they have access to internet, they have a cell phone. It's something very necessary to their lives. They can access the internet and do many things accessing a smartphone. We have today in Brazil more than 200 million smartphones, or if you have 209 million people have also more cell phones than people here in Brazil. And perhaps this number will increase soon. We have a high potential of new technology and technology services. perhaps you have also had a chance to get a 99 services. It's like Uber. You call from your smartphone, from the app, and you call a car to take you from to the university to other places. And in many cities in Brazil, it's cheaper than Uber. It's a competitor to Uber. And it was the first Brazilian unicorn, these new platforms, these technological platforms in order to provide services, okay? And there are many startups developing in Belo Horizonte, Florianópolis, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, where young people study and also work, so they are developing fast in many cities in Brazil. There are special programs, private and public, in order that young people present the idea and the startups finance, invest in this kind of service, in this kind of app. Here I have some students that also took part in programs like that and worked and did succeed and succeeded. Financial and beer industries are the most valuable brands in Brazil. We have beverage industry is a big industry in Brazil. You can have, perhaps you have also noticed in the supermarkets how many brands we have. It's a concentrated sector, but there are many brands. There are Brazilian and also many international brands in the supermarkets here. Okay, we are going to talk about financial services later, because it's also a big sector in Brazil and also very, very concentrated. Sorry. Brazil is also an important foreign direct investment destination. Brazil is one of the 10 recipients of FDI in the world. Let me explain to you what is FDI, or foreign direct investment. It's not a financial investment. Financial investments is provided or made by banks and financial institutions. This foreign direct investment is the capital or the investment that industries do. It's productive investment. It can be the greenfield investment. If you start doing this, you start building an industry, for example, or it could be if you buy another company here also, or you buy the share of a company here, a Brazilian company or a company that has open market here in Brazil. Okay, so we are the top 10 recipients of FDI in the world and the only Latin American country in that list. Depending on the year, we go to the top, then we go to another level, but in the last years, we are the 10 tops in this 10 top list. In 2018, we were the 9th largest receiver of FDI. In 2017, we were the 4th receiver. In 2018, after influx to Brazil increased by 8% to $63 billion, supported by a significant influx in the energy sector. Energy sector in Brazil attracts a lot of investment from international companies because they know we have technology to produce in competitive terms, and we have also cooperation deals with other countries in order to provide this kind of technology to them, this kind of service to them, and the transmission line. So most of the current FDI that we receive are destined to renewable energy sector or transmission line sector of energy. The large investors of last year in Brazil were the Netherlands, USA, Spain, Luxembourg, France, and Japan. I thought it would be China, but I have checked that it's not China. And perhaps the Netherlands, we can explain the Netherlands that it's not a huge economy because Netherlands bought and had made fusions and mergers of companies with companies of Brazilian companies that are established here. So they buy or do a merging in order to have bigger companies, and also through stock shares. And or that it's different from the greenfield investment. Greenfield investment, when you do the investment for the first time. Stock shares, you buy the shares of a company. You can do FDI in both these two ways. Okay, so we are also very important market in terms of FDI. I'm only telling you good things about Brazil. Have you realized that? Here you can see that in 2016 we were the 7th place behind the United States, United Kingdom, China, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, Singapore. Now we are the 9th. We have checked that. And in terms of FDI in millions of US dollars, you can see that net, it's the outward minus inward, this is the net. So you can see that it grew until the economic crisis, then it also increases, then it stopped increasing. Okay, and so depending on the year, it's lower in the lower level and in the upper level, but in general, we have net amount in terms of FDI. We are more a biggest receiver than a investor. Although we have also big companies that also do a lot of FDI abroad. Here is not exactly direct related to economy, but it's indirectly. We can say that Brazil is an important player in international or regional economic institutions and forums of discussions, forums of negotiations. We can say that, for example, Brazil is a member of the World Trade Organization, but it's an old member. We are a member since 1995, when WTO, the biggest institution to negotiate the liberalization of trade, was established in 1995. Before WTO, there was a forum, a big agreement called GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, and Brazil was also a member since 1945, since it was established also. So Brazilian is a very important supporter of trade liberalization, international trade liberalization. The World Trade Organization now is an international institution and has a general director that is Brazilian. He works in Geneva, in Switzerland, and he is Brazilian. It's also a sign that Brazil has become a more important economy and has a member, a politician that is the general chief of an international organization like that. The next one, International Monetary Fund. We are also members since it was established after the Second World War, and we received a lot of money from the IMF when it had economic crisis. If you perhaps remember, when from the Brazilians that are here, you have heard about IMF when you are at school. You have learned the Brazilian crisis and how we dealt with that, and many times we have to ask IMF for money in order to restrict our economy. So IMF, there are times that IMF is remembered as a good institution that lend money for us, but also that asked a lot. We have to follow many demands of IMF in order to receive this money. The third one is Southern Common Market. In Spanish, we call Mercosur. In Portuguese, Mercosul. It's our common market is under construction. We have never reached a common market yet. It's not exactly a common market. We are developing it as a common market. Perhaps you are seeing on TV these days the negotiations of Brazil and Argentina, because we have governments that are aligned at this time. So they are trying to turn Mercosur in a biggest market, not only a free trade area, but a common market that's even more difficult because it includes the free movement of goods, services, but also of people, of workforce, and capital. This is something much more difficult to reach. Brazil is the biggest economy here. It includes Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Venezuela used to be a member, but is suspended. It's still officially, it's still a member, but doesn't take part anymore due to the political problems they are dealing with. And Brazil, it's the biggest exporter to all these countries, to Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We export much more than we import from them. So it's a very important agreement. It's a preferential agreement, and many governments are trying to give more importance to Mercosur. We are also going to talk about this more if we have time. But Brazil is also a member of BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It was established in 2009. The first presidential meeting was in 2009. In my opinion, it's a very important forum to discuss many economic and non-economic issues, perhaps environment, education, cooperation in education, technical cooperation also. But it was established mainly in order to find a financial architecture more secure after the economic crisis, the Lehman Brothers that started the economic crisis in the United States. So it's a kind of forum in order to discuss different issues. They have a big agenda, and they want to cooperate in order to be, for us, international relations, we say, a more important player, international player. And we consider that all of them are emerging economies, big economies. They have big territories. They have big populations. They are all emerging economies that showed very growth, economic developing in the last years. Perhaps today we can discuss it later. Russia and South Africa and Brazil couldn't maintain their economic growth, but BRICS is still there. There are still meetings every year in order to discuss and to turn it in a more important international player. Okay? Then G20. G20 is also a forum. It's established in 1999 after the emerging economies crisis that also reached Brazil and Argentina. It was established in order to be a forum in order to discuss also financial issues. And all the members are composed by the 20 largest economies in the world. So if you read books from the 90s, the 80s, you would only find G7. There were the 7 biggest economies in the world. But now you can even see this G20 forum and G20 meetings, because it involved the 20 biggest economy, including the emerging ones. It doesn't make sense to have meetings of G7 because China, India, they are very important economies. They can't be out of the economic decisions. So, but whereas WTO and IMF, they are official institutions, G20 is not. G20 is a forum. If you want to take part, you can go. If you don't want to, it's not necessary. There are no sanctions. In IMF and WTO, yes, you have to follow the rules. The rules are for everyone. Okay. Sorry. Here. Brazil has 470,000 of business enterprise, is a big number, and 94% of which are micro and small. This is a very good number. If you think that Brazil is a big economy, there are many transnational enterprises here, yes, it's correct. Especially if you look some sectors, individual sectors. But as a whole, the most important enterprise are not the biggest one, are the smallest and micro and smallest one. They are responsible for 94% of the business that is done in Brazil. And here I include all the services. If you go to a hairdresser, if you go to a bank, if you buy transportation services, everything here, but it's a good number. And they got even more importance in the last 15 years. Perhaps 10, 15 years ago, they had no so importance as they have now. Many people, as they were fired and they are unemployed, they tried to open small and micro enterprises in Brazil. If you look in the neighborhood, you can find many small and micro enterprises. It's not difficult to open one in Brazil. It's difficult to close one, but it's not difficult to open. Okay, so the biggest ones are responsible, only for 1%. 1%. They are not the biggest employees. The smallest one are the biggest employees. Let me see, what time is it? Okay, more 10 minutes. I think we can have a break, okay. Here I can show you which are the 20 Brazilian companies were in the global 2000 Forbes ranking. Forbes is a specialized journal that every year ranks the biggest companies, and we can see that Petrobras is the 5th oil company in the world, biggest one. It's a good number also, especially we consider that Petrobras was involved in many political scandals in the last 3, 4, 5 years. But it recovered. It changed the present many times, but it's recovering. And now it's already the 5th biggest company in the world in this sector, oil, petroleum. It's a public enterprise. The second one and the third one, both are private and are banks. Here in Brazil, we have big banks. We have heard in the United States that they are the biggest to fail. The biggest one, how can the biggest bank that cannot fail? Here we also have. Because if they fail, if they don't succeed, we have big problems in our economy. Because the financial sector is very, very concentrated. So Itaú Unibanco is a merger. We're merged in, I think, 7-8 years ago. And it's in this position. And Bradesco is another private bank, is it in this position in the world. We are talking about the biggest company in the world. It's also a very big, good number. Vale, that I have already told you, in the mining sector, is in this position. It's also something that we have to highlight, because after the problem in Brumadinho, we thought that Vale would not recover, but it's not. It doesn't have so many problems in international markets. Banco do Brasil, it's another bank, but it's public, and Eletrobras, energy and also public. The next one will be GBS, is the JBS, the most important, the biggest company that produces meat in Brazil, and it's also exports, but it's a holding. It produces many things. It was also involved in political scandals in Brazil in the last 2-3 years. So what you can see that big companies are from specific sectors, commodity, energy, and mining, and banks. And the other one, GBS, is also meat and food and other things, but it's also more specialized in food. We are very important in export and import market. Brazil has the largest trade flow in Latin America. We are the second largest exported world. I have to check this number. I don't know if I have to put something I forgot. China is, for more than 10 years, our main destination. We export a lot to China. We'll show data about this. Since 2009, China buys a lot from Brazil. Many things, special mining and food. 39% of our manufacturing export are destined for Latin American and Caribbean countries. If you look to the data about import and export from Brazil towards all of our neighbors and our partners in South America, in Latin America, we can see that we have superávit. We export more than import for almost. I think only Bolivia, we don't have more export than import. All of our neighbors are very important export destinations to Brazil. Even the ones, or more, the ones from Mercosur. Argentina, I will show data about Argentina, is our third most important trade partner. China, United States, and Argentina. And we export a lot of manufactured products to Argentina. To Argentina, it's the opposite. To China, we export a lot of food, agriculture, and minor products. But to Argentina, no. We export machines, cars, and technological products. We have very good trade with Argentina in terms of high-value products. Mercosur accounts for about half of the interregional export of Latin America and the Caribbean. We have not a so high level of interregional trade as, for example, the European Union, but we have a good number here. We have half of what we export for Latin America goes to the Mercosur countries. So these are also very special partners of us. Here, I don't know if you can see from there, it's data from 2000 to 2016. You can see in red that China raised in importance in terms of trade destination of Brazil, especially from after the economic crisis, 2009, 2010, and it's in 2011 was not so high, but in 2013, 14, we continue exporting a lot to China. It's our most important destination in the world. Then Latin America and the Caribbean is also important, but look, here we are taking into consideration only China in red. In yellow, we are considering all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So if you consider all of them, they are important. But if you compare to China, you can see that China is most important because it's only one country is responsible for this performance. Okay, sorry. We have also some special relations with Africa, and the United States is here in blue. It doesn't change so much during the last 10 years. And the European Union is in purple. We can see that it's also an important destination, especially in terms of what export regarding to food and also raw materials. We buy a lot of processed foods from the European Union, and we export a lot of raw materials and food to the European Union. Here you can see also the participation of main destinations markets of Brazil exports. You can see it's in Portuguese, but I can tell you in purple it's the European Union since 2001 in terms of percentage of the main markets destinations, and in yellow it's China that grew a lot. In blue, the United States. I think here it's European Union. Here the United States in gray, in gray. And South America in green. South America, it's also a very important destination of our exports. So here you can see that these numbers are from 2017. You can see the importance of China here. Look, we export 20% of total exports to China. Then in Japan, the United States, and then Argentina. So you can check here, these numbers are the top destinations in 2017. Then the Netherlands, we can say it's also the fourth. I think Japan, India, the Asian ones are not so significant here. And United Kingdom, Russia, France, and here Paraguay, Colombia, Uruguay, Peru, and Ecuador. And Chile. Chile, we export 2.5% of all our exports go to Chile. Here are what we export most. We exported $219 billion in iron ore. Look how is the importance of iron in the balanced trade of Brazil. Crude petroleum, then soybeans, raw sugar, poultry meat, and cars. They are the most important. Also here, sulfate chemical, it's also a mineral. So you can see that these one are the most important. All of them are mineral or agriculture commodities. Cars is also an important one if consider in terms of the whole, and it's the only industrial sector that is very good represented here. in terms of where from we import, China is the first one with 19%. South America, I think it's South America, South Africa, I can check, I don't remember. Japan, Germany, we import a lot of Germany, Italy, France, United States, and Argentina. Look, China, United States, and Argentina are the tops in terms of imports and exports. Okay, and here Mexico is also important. Chile, again, with the same participation. Uruguay, Paraguay. And what are the products regarding origins? Refined petroleum, vehicles, cars, because vehicles, there are other kinds of cars or vehicles, not only cars. Buses, for example, are here. And package, I will check. Resistors, and let's see here if I can. Broadcasting accessories in blue, and refined alcohol in yellow, and wet. We import a lot of wet from Argentina and also from other countries because we are not self-sufficient in wet. To make bread, we have to import. Okay, so let's have a break of 10. Remember that at 11, Professor Dave Slopse will come here, so we have some more time in order to finish this, and then he will advise you. You give you say some words to you. Okay. So let's start again. In these 10 minutes left before Professor Davidson Lopes come, I would like to present to you the biggest problems that I think that Brazil economy deals now. The first one, I think, is look at this map. When we see the industrial production, we can see that it's very, very concentrated in the state of São Paulo. You can see that in the blue one, it concentrates 32% of all the industry production of Brazil. It's a high amount. And the other one, the second one is Rio de Janeiro. Is Minas Gerais. It's 10.3. So there's a big difference between São Paulo and Minas Gerais that is in the second place. The third one is Rio de Janeiro, but it's a very, very small state, federal state, is responsible for 5.5 of the industrial production of Brazil. So this is something very that makes the Brazilian economy very fragile, because if we concentrate, and how can we explain this concentration? There is historical explanations about this. São Paulo concentrated the coffee plantation during the 11th century, and after the crisis of 1930s, this market that was the main sector of Brazil could not be sustained because of the international crisis, and Brazil has a very huge production of coffee. The prices went lower and lower, and they couldn't maintain the production. So this capital that exceeds from the coffee plantation go to the industry. That is why we can see from the end of the 19th century until the 20th century that São Paulo concentrates the most important industrial production of Brazil, and it maintains this position during the whole century. And as far as I can see, it won't change in the near future. There is, the states of Brazil are specialized in different things. Whereas São Paulo is specialized in industrial production and services, we can see that Minas Gerais is specialized in mineral production and other services, but the main sector is mineral. And as you can see here, Goiás, Mato Grosso, and Mato Grosso do Sul, here, these three states concentrate the largest plantation of soybeans and the agribusiness. The agribusiness there in these three states are very strong. The economies of these states depend a lot on the agribusiness. Okay, and the north of Brazil, there is not so many a good concentration of industrial production. There, unfortunately, Brazil is the parts are very different from each other. So in the north, there is not so many concentration of industrial production. For example, Amazonas, whereas there is a free area of production, free tax area of production, produces only 2.3 of the whole industrial production of Brazil. So in the military government, they did a free tax area in the north of Brazil in order to stimulate industrial investments there. But I think that the results are not very good enough as the government think it would be. Okay? So industrial production concentration is the first problem. The second problem, I think you can see here better. It's the GDP per capita. We have talked about the GDP, that Brazil is the 9th largest economy in the world. But if we check the GDP per capita, that means GDP divided by the whole population, we can see that the amount of revenue is not so high. It's, in this case, not so high and didn't change during the last decade. This is a problem. For example, here, Brazil is, Venezuela is this one. You can see the upward and the down that the fall that it has in the last 7 years. Venezuela is this one. Chile is has the highest GDP per capita in Latin America, and also in Latin America, and has a good GDP per capita. I think also is the country in Latin America, and there is not so many economic and social difference as in the others, because in Brazil and the others, there is a reality that social and economic heterogeneity is a problem. In Chile, is not a so big problem as in the other countries. And Brazil is this one. We have seen that we have improved in GDP per capita, but since 2004 until 2015, when the economic crisis began. And this is for most of the economists that I have read in order to prepare this class. This is one of the most problems that economists think that we will have to deal in the near future. The GDP per capita is falling down. And this is a very bad thing, because it shows that the economy is recovering, but in a slow pace, and also the GDP per capita is not recovering in a good way in order to people have all the things they need. Sure, as Brazil is very different inside in terms of the federal station, in the cities, social classes, in the geographic parts, It's so different. This is a very huge problem. Also, the GDP per capita perhaps doesn't show the reality. It's not so bad. So there are many people that earn a lot of money, and there are also a lot of people that earns a minimum salary that here in Brazil it's R$1,000, about $250, for example. And there are many researches that were done that showed that this minimum wages, minimum salary is not enough in order to pay for the whole expense that people have in Brazil. There is a very part of the population, Brazilian population, that is unemployed, and there is has not a formal employment, and the minimum wage is also not in a good, in enough value enough in order to pay for the expenditures. Okay, so if you compare, for example, I think there is a number here from 2017. Today I have checked Brazil here, is $11,007 GDP per capita. And if you can see, Argentina is higher, 17.6, and Chile is 20.5. So there is a difference, a big difference in GDP per capita in our region. Now, after in the half of 2019, the GDP per capita fell to near $9,000. $9,000 is the GDP per capita now in Brazil. And perhaps it's going to fall again in the end of the year. Mexico has a GDP per capita that is higher than the Brazilian one. Here is the country population, okay, in terms of the whole population. Argentina has 43 million, Brazil 209, and Mexico, the third one, 128. Okay? Also, Costa Rica has a GDP per capita of 11, Puerto Rico higher. So, the second biggest problem that I think Brazil is dealing now is the industry participation in GDP. Look as how it is falling during the last decades. If you look from 1950s to 1980s, we can see that it increased a lot. We can say that from the 1960s to the 1980s, Brazil improved in terms of industrialization. This is when we have planned our most important strategies in order to be a more industrialized country. We can discuss this because we can discuss if it's industrialized country or is not, and in which level it is. But what we can see is that after we have opened and from the 1950s to the 1980s, we have a more closed economy. We didn't open our economy to imports or to FDI or to financial capital. We have opened our economy after the 1990s, when most of the Latin American economies did the same way. We have advices from what we call the Washington Consensus. I don't know if you have already heard about that, but it was thought some steps or some strategies that we have to change in our economy in order to be more competitive, to be in the globalized economy where many other countries were doing the same way. So Brazil started its opening in the beginning of the 1990s. We received many international investments. We opened our economy to the imports. We lowered the tariff barriers in order to be more competitive. And we can stay the whole day discussing that if it was, which results we have doing this. But as we are in UFMG and most of the economists here are heterodox, and I can say to you that many of them, if my colleagues would be here, they will say that it was not good enough, that we didn't succeed doing that. Our economy was not prepared to do this opening. We did it very quick, and we couldn't prepare some strategic sectors to deal with this competition. So we lost sector participation in many industrial sectors, and we couldn't recover after that. That is because we can see from this data that after 1990s, the participation, industry participation GDP fell from the 90s until now. And it's trying to recover that, but I think that most forecasts say that it will be even more difficult now if we don't invest in technology, if we don't invest in the improvement of our labor force, if we do not have enough investments in research and development and infrastructure, we have this big problem now that we can say that it's responsible for these results, this performance. We have difficulties in investing and difficulties in developing new technologies when many other markets abroad are doing much faster than us. And perhaps it could be we have big problems in the future if we cannot improve our industry participation in our GDP. If we choose agriculture, even if agriculture is from agribusiness, it involves technology, it involves research. We have important institutions that do research regarding agriculture, but especially if we are talking in a globalized economy, an open economy, where many markets in Asia are improving in terms of investment in technology, and most of them do involving the public sector, not only by the private sector. This is something that we have to care, otherwise we are going to stay as a developing country, and perhaps not even a more developing country, and least developing country. So also here I have checked the website of the National Industry Confederation that makes a lot of research about industry in Brazil. And here they say it's a research that says that the impact of economic activities in the Brazilian economy, increase in production resulting from an increase from R$1. If you invest R$1, how much it returns to you after some times. And here in production of economic activity in 2016. Also, everything is in reais here, our currency. So if you invest R$1 in industry, it will return 2.40 cents to you, to your economy. And if you invest in agriculture R$1, it would only returns 1.60. So here you can see the difference. If we can also talk about the quality of employment. If you invest more in industry, you can integrate more in the globalized production net, and you can it can result in many other good employments, better employment, and good jobs, and also in other sectors. And here you can see that if you do the same thing in agriculture, the returns is not the same as good as in industry. Services also. There are services, for example, transport services, storage services that returns better than services, for example, financial. Financial is something very special because I think it's totally, it's not linked to the production economy. So you can be a very rich country in terms of financial investments and not have the same performance in industrial or productive investment, okay? Vocês querem continuar aqui? Quer já parar? Vamos, depois eu termino aqui. I'm just in time, so... Good morning. Tudo bem, você? Tudo bem, imagina que isso já estava no dedo já.
Acho que não. Acho que até é melhor falar em perfeito, deixá-los receber primeiro, né? E aproveitar aqui e abrir a minha também, porque tem algumas informações que... Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you once again. I hope you're having a good time here at Belo Horizonte, that we're enjoying the courses and additionally the rich cultural life of our city. I apologize for interrupting Professor Nasser's class, but we wanted to talk a little bit with you about one of our programs, which is the minor in international studies. We believe that diversity is a paramount value for education. And from the perspective of our office, it was extremely important to create more classrooms like this, in which you have international diversity. You have a variety of backgrounds, of languages, of beliefs, of religious and non-religious beliefs, and so on, and have an opportunity of a richer cultural exchange. And traditionally, Brazilian universities have a small percentage of foreign students. One of the difficulties that foreign students have for coming to Brazil is the language barrier. I hope that by the end of the course, some of you are already more fluent in Portuguese, but I hope that most of you will get some at least some basic skills in Portuguese, right? So we have created a set of courses in English and Spanish. The list that you have before you is the list of courses that comprises our minor in international studies. You see that the courses there, they have to obey the following criteria. One, they have an international or comparative perspective. And two, they are taught in either English or Spanish. You'll find very diverse courses, such as Chinese culture, which will be offered by a partner university, by a professor from a partner university. You'll find other courses such as Arte, first one there, Arte, Cultura y Literatura de los Países de Lengua Española. You'll find courses on Indian music, on international law and politics, on law and history of the United Nations, on the geopolitics of energy, because these courses will be offered by very different departments. They'll be offered by the Department of Public Law, by the Department of Economics, by the Department of Aviation Engineering, and so on. But they all will have a comparative or an international focus. We plan, obviously, we are not going to offer all the courses in the catalog every semester, but we plan to offer about 25% of courses of the catalog. So, for example, in the next semester, which will be our first, we'll have 18 of the about 60 courses you see there. And we believe that over time, the catalog will grow because professors, the word still hasn't spread around here. And we believe that more professors and more students will be joining us in the following semesters. One of the problems that we have, however, and I would like to ask your help for that, is to spread the word. It's sometimes difficult for the message to get to the right people. Not everybody is willing to take a course in a foreign language. Not everybody is willing to, crazy about international or comparative affairs. But most of you who are here, I believe, are quite interested, are quite keen to learning more about those things, and you will know people who are like-minded. So we would appreciate if you could tell your colleagues about it, and if we could perhaps have more people engaged in this fascinating project, what to us is a fascinating project, right? Professor Davidson will now say a few words.
So good morning again, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here before you again. Just some quick notes. First of all, along the same lines. You know that UFMG has been ranked number 8 in Latin America. It is a top 3 institution in Brazil for a long time. But although we have been reaching this threshold of excellency, although we are considered, by any standard, a world-class university, a regional leading university, not quite often we see this kind of international classroom. So this is one of the reasons why we are thinking of ways to prolong the magic. Having this kind of classroom on a permanent basis is what we are looking for. So this is what the minor is all about, and this is the beauty of this initiative, if I may. We want to have these beautiful people for all year long, and we want to have this international, very international atmosphere during our regular academic terms. So this is our plan for the coming semesters and years. And we do rely on you. We do count on your help. Please let your people, your colleagues, your friends know that we would be more than happy to welcome them to Brazil, to Belo Horizonte, to UFMG. Just a second note, a quick one as well. I've been watching you guys. You are composing beautiful short essays. I want to congratulate you on this and congratulate you for, the witty, very sometimes provocative takeaways. So keep up the good work. Those of you who haven't yet started, you're supposed to deliver this kind of homework in order to be properly assessed by this professor. Please do it. You still have time to catch up with your colleagues. And I'll be, every day I spare some time of my day to read you. And I'm really positively impressed. So again, congratulations and keep up the good work. So it's time for Patrícia to take over again. Thank you very much.
Perhaps they have any questions?
Yeah, that would be good, huh?
Yeah. Perhaps
that would be gentle of us to let you
just
raise some questions.
Another quick note before we go. I'm quite new to Twitter. I've been following you as well.
Such a newbie.
But until a week ago, I didn't even have a picture there on my profile, which is quite new, by the way. So it has been a pleasure to follow your comments, to see how you were enjoying the course and Belo Horizonte, and please count on us if we can assist you in any way to make your experience here better. And for the students from Brazil, it has also been quite interesting for me to see how much you've been able to learn about Brazil, right? Because we are all from different backgrounds here. There are people from law, from letters, from chemistry, from quite different backgrounds, and we are normally we will not have discussions about all the topics that are being covered here in this summer school. And I see that they're enjoying the interaction very much, which I hope will continue after the course, right? So if you have any questions regarding the minor, we'll be glad to answer them. Obviously, you can also contact us later.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
So
Professor
back to your
Nasser.
economics
Thank you very
class.
much.
Thank you, Professor. See you guys around.
So let's continue. I promised that I will finish at about 15 minutes, so we can have time to discuss Brazilian economy. Okay, if you have questions, we can debate the topics we have discussed here. Okay, so we have talked about Brazilian economic problems, the concentration of industry in some states, federal states of Brazil. The second one, that we don't have a high level of GDP per capita. We couldn't succeed in improving it during the last decades, 2 decades. Sure, perhaps you have already heard about President Lula's social programs that really were important for us in order to reduce poverty and economic heterogeneity in terms of revenue and of salary. And we can say that it was very good succeeded. We can have data from many different researchers that say that from 2004 until 2014, around 40 to 50 million people in Brazil left the line of poverty. It's a very significant number. We had some social programs. The most famous one is the Bolsa Família, that is still ongoing. Lula, it was not exactly that Lula introduced this program, but it was during his mandate that it was boosted. And really, we have many researches and data that show that this was very important in order to lower the differences of salaries and revenues in Brazil, and also in terms of poverty. Okay, so the third problem that we see here is that industry is not improving in terms of participation in total GDP of Brazil. We don't have too much enough investment in the last decades, and also infrastructure, research and development in order to improve our level, our industry performance. That is a very huge problem. And that is why we also decided, it was a deliberated choice to choose the agribusiness instead of industry. And some sectors are very well, perform very well, but others couldn't recover after the economic crisis, or couldn't compete with other products from abroad. So the industry participation in our GDP is going down. The third problem that I can mention here is Brazil has a very concentrated banking sector. I have already mentioned this to you. We have ranked the three biggest banks in Brazil, and also they are the biggest enterprises in Brazil, and we can say that the banking sector is very concentrated, and the cost of credit in the country is still incredibly high. The interest rate of Brazil is going down slowly, but is going down. But if you have check the credit card interest rate here in Brazil, you'll see that it's even higher than the basic interest rate that we have in Brazil. If you have debts in Brazil in your credit card, you have to pay more than 100% per year of interest rate. This is something very bad, not only for households, but also for investors and entrepreneurship that need to have capital investment in order to invest, or to construct, or in order to buy a machine or something like that. So the credit concentration sector and the high tax rates that are common in Brazil is our third problem that I mentioned here, okay? And that is why the financial market is very, very profitable in Brazil. The biggest companies, out of the 10 biggest companies in Brazil, 3 or 4 are banks. Second, the country is also a home to a very large young and unbanked population. If you go to the countryside or small towns, you see that most of people don't have a bank account. They receive their money in cash, and they have never gone to a bank. Around 60% of the population in Brazil don't have a bank account. So they don't have access to financial services in general, okay? Also, we have a low participation in international trade. I have told you many things about agriculture trade, mineral trade, industrial trade in Brazil, how much we export, but I can say to you that we are still a very closed market. We take part of only 1% of total international trade that is made in the world. It's a very low participation rate. Brazil has advanced little international competitiveness and export sophistication. If you go to the MIT website where they map all the complexities in the world, you can see that even if we have agribusiness, that we invest a lot in research and development of better livestock or agriculture products, we can also see that the other parts of industry, the processed industry, didn't not perform better in this kind of sophistication. The value added of our products are not so high as many countries in Asia, for example, that invested in sophisticating their industries with investing in research and developing. And last one, what we call Custo Brasil, or in English we can translate to the cost, the Brazilian cost to produce. We have a precarious infrastructure in terms of ports. For example, our ports are out of dated. We need urgently to invest more in this kind of infrastructure. We don't use railways. They have a lack of railways here in Brazil in order to transport. And even if you pay to something to go by maritime vehicles, you will see that it's very expensive. So most of our products are distributed by vehicles, and our highways are not very good. So the cost of transportation in Brazil is still very high. If you are very competitive in producing a product, a good, and we have a high cost to transport it, the product in the final price is not so competitive as it should be. So this is something that we need urgently improve. We have high taxes in order to invest, in order to consume, in terms of transport, everything. If you you buy something in one state that need to go to the other, you have to pay taxes. There are different taxes, and the taxes structure in Brazil is very complex. And President Bolsonaro, that is now started his mandate this year, is planning to trying to simplify the tax structure, because Brazil, it's very difficult. There are taxes in federal level, in state level, and municipal level. So it's very difficult to deal with such a amount of different taxes and different structures to pay these taxes. And the last one I have already mentioned is the low degree of trade openness. We have high trade barriers. I have this data for you that you can see that Brazil, in average, put 8.3% in terms of tariffs or into imported products. It's higher than India, China, United States, and other European countries, and also Japan. So we don't take part also in the international trade, also because we are still very closed. Our economy still is a common practice to put high tariff barriers in imports. Okay, you can ask me, but you have mentioned that beginning in 1990s, Brazil tried to open its economy in some sectors. In other sectors, we still stayed very, very close, maintaining the high tariffs, and this is in order to protect some sectors, some domestic sectors. And that's why the sectors didn't have a stimulus to improve. So Brazil still have a huge state that intervene in the economy, that protect some sectors, that especially because there are many lobbies, elite lobbies that have influence in the government in order to have this kind of policies in order to protect industries, okay, and some sectors. The last one, I can show you the percent change of previous quarter in terms of Brazil, GDP growth, or in this case now we have a bad number here. We had in last year, we have a technical recession in Brazil now, we can say, minus growth. So we are expecting this year 0.5% of growth. It's the best forecast, say 1%. But what we can see that comparing to other developing countries like South Africa or Korea, we have a not very good number in terms of GDP growth, and especially if you consider United States that this year and the last year have a good growth performance in economy, we can see that we are staying behind the others, okay? And that is why we have to do some reforms, political and economic reforms, in order to improve this rate. And the last one that I can also show you is the unemployment rate. You can see here from the 2012 until January of 2019, the unemployment rate grew very much. Yes, it's a result of the economic crisis that we are having since 2014. I have to say to you that this economic crisis began in Dilma Rousseff's mandate, so it's not something so new. We are in the 5th year of recession or difficulties in growing, economic growth. So many reasons explain this economic performance, but what it's in my opinion, the worst result, the worst reflection is in unemployment rate. Around 13 million people are unemployed in Brazil in this year. We have, this is a very new data, and so we can see that around 12 and 13% of people that is able to work is not working. If you consider the ones that are looking for jobs and are not didn't and couldn't get it, the number is even higher. Around 40 million people in Brazil want to work and couldn't, or are looking for a job, or stop trying to look for a job to get a job because it's not getting it for the last 2 years. Okay, in my opinion, it's our biggest problem now, social problem that it has impacts in our social life. And it's not, the unemployment rate is not so high only in low the workforce that is not so educated. It's also high in the parts of the workforce that also have studied for some times. For sure, the high unemployment rates are higher when the person has not so many years of studying. But the unemployment rate is growing even in social sectors that people has studied for 5 or 10 years. That's something that is new in Brazil also. We didn't have this 10, 15 years ago. So this is there are forecasts that say that we are recovering, that we are doing better this year, but the most forecasts also say that we are going to have some time to recover. It will be difficult. It's not something very juncture, but it's a structural unemployment that is worse to avoid. And in order to finish this section, I can say that we still have big inequalities. Brazil remains one of the most unequal countries in the world. Half of the population receives 10% of total household incomes. Could you imagine that? This difference. 10%, half of the people in Brazil receive 10% of the household incomes, while the half other holds 90%. That's a very, very huge difference. And the impacts of the economic crisis didn't reach the elite of the population in Brazil, or if it reached it in a not so strong way. So many people still are still consuming as they were before the economic crisis, especially if we look for data of luxury products or goods. And gender wage inequalities and opportunities is still something very real if we talk about Brazil. Even if you go to universities or companies or services, you see that most of the jobs are done by men, especially in some sectors and in some kinds of work, even higher. The highest, some highest technical jobs are done by men. And the male workers are paid 50% in average more than women. It's an average. Sure, there are big differences between sectors or different kinds of work, but we can say that in average, male workers are paid 50% more than women. Besides the feeling of inequalities and poverty, what we can say that it still exists, and it's one of the biggest problems we have to deal with in the next years, and it's directly related to violence. The much the society has inequalities, the much violence can grow. Okay. More than 50 million people, Brazilians, still live below the poverty line. I have already told you that during Governo Lula and Dilma Rousseff, this disparity was not so huge, but it's starting raising again. More people are entering the line of poverty due to unemployment and other factors related to that. Okay, and there is still racial and youth disadvantage. I think that youth employment, it's something that's a challenge in most part of the world, but also here, youth unemployment, it's higher than adults unemployment, especially if the youth didn't have a certificate, education certificate. I think I have already told them. I can show you about the BRICS data about GDP and how is Brazil comparing to other emerging countries. We can say that we have a low level of GDP growth comparing to others. Sure, Russia have problems. Here, South Africa also, it's not so good as it used to be, but I think that with considering emerging countries, especially China and India, Brazil is not able to catch up with other economies. Perhaps if we couldn't recover in the near future, perhaps we are not going to can be called emerging economies anymore, an emerging economy anymore. Okay, to be an emerging economy, you have to have a political role in the political international scenario, but in order to have that, you also have to have a stable economic growth, a stable economic growth of your GDP. Otherwise, you can't catch up with other economies that are growing as India and China, as you can see in this GDP per capita or GDP growth. Although we have the new normal of China is around 6 and 7%, Brazil is 1 or 0%. So it's something that we have to think about, because if they are emerging economies, they should continue growing. Okay? So thank you very much. I am open to questions soon. This is my email address. If you want to send some message to me, it will be a pleasure to answer to you. Okay, but please, it's your time. Do you want the microphone? I will sit down in order to...
Thank you, Professor, for the presentation with really interesting data related to the Brazilian economy. I would like to ask something related to, in the last 2 decades, Brazil has seen a decrease in its industrial participation in GDP. How do we relate this data with the good development of the Brazilian economy during the 2008 financial? How can you relate it? The decrease of industrial participation and doing pretty well during the last world crisis.
Do you mean before and after the economic crisis?
Actually, before, because we had a very interesting growth of commodities, right? So
yeah.
Brazil exporting these products, so it was really good for our economy. So
yeah.
How can we relate it to the decrease of industrial participation?
Okay. I have shown data that shows that between 2003 and 2014, but perhaps before, from 2004 and 2012, we had a boom of commodities, and especially China bought a lot of commodities from Brazil. So we say that it was a very good time to save money, this money that we export a lot, in order to invest in industry. And Brazil did this. So although the economic growth was very good, Brazil was growing in terms of GDP, it was not the investment in industry didn't grow at the same path. So I think we lost the chance. When the commodities boom was there, we should have saved money in order to invest in research, industry infrastructure, and we didn't do that. I think that one of the biggest problems of Governo Lula, it was that it favored the banks and financial sector, not exactly the industrial sector. Sure, there are industrial sectors that have a high performance and also improved this time, but the whole industry did not. And I think we didn't get the right thing, and we didn't do the right thing when we didn't decide to save money and revert in investments, productive investments. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello, my name is Anda. I'm from South Africa. I wanted to find out, you mentioned that Brazil, how do I say the word? Brasilia. What is it? Brazil. Okay, so you mentioned that Brazil is on a path of encouraging and developing startups. So you're going on a more entrepreneurial route. So my question then is, does this entrepreneurial focus feed into education and the curriculum from a primary and secondary level? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. If that's the case, how is it the case? And if it's not the case, why is that not the case? And my second question is, how much is invested into early childhood development centers as well?
The second one, could you please repeat?
So how much is invested? You spoke about the investment process. So how much is actually invested into early childhood development centers? Because in your presentation, you spoke about gender disparities. You spoke about youth often and from a racial perspective. But I didn't get a sense of your understanding of investments when it comes to children. So like, how much is actually invested into early childhood development centers?
How much it should be in order to Brazil, in order to develop?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, exactly, I will start from your second question. The exactly amount, there are many researchers and forecasts how much we should have invested in order to catch up, for example, to China or other countries that are big countries. We have to compare to other big countries, otherwise it won't make sense. So what they say is that, for example, some sectors like manufacturers, we are good. We performed good, but not in high complexity industries. So I think it's the most problems that they say. And perhaps there is a plan here in Brazil now in order to start investing in infrastructure. It's something more famous, more said than education. Education, fortunately, the president is not focusing on. I don't know if you have already had a chance to talk to your colleagues. Public universities, we concentrate the most part of research and developing in Brazil. And not the private sector. It's the public university sector that concentrates it. And for example, the budget will be cut down in 30% starting this July. So there are many researchers and professors saying how can we catch up with other countries with people that decide this don't understand anything about how are the spillovers of these investments in other sectors or to the developing or even to the economic growth. So, but I also understand regarding your first question that yes, if we have to limit of our budget, this is the case of Brazil now. We have fiscal problems. We have to cut some investments, public investments. But I think that the most important thing that we should do now is invest in primary and secondary schools. Yes, universities are important. They have spillover much faster than the primary and the secondary schools, but our primary and secondary schools in Brazil, especially the public ones, are not very good. We have 97% of the students are enrolled in a school, in the primary school, but the level of the quality of the schools are not very good. This is something that we should improve. Obviously, as everything in Brazil, there are big differences. That there are many good public schools, many good private schools, but in general, we can say that we should focus on primary education in order to catch up with other countries in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, because I think it starts with early childhood development centers, primary, secondary, and tertiary. There has to be a correlation or a focus on all those sectors,
yes,
or levels in order for development
you
to
mean
spread.
the quality of the primary school and the growth or the developing of a country? Yes, sure.
Hi, good morning. I would like to know about the perspectives for the Brazilian economy in the future. If it's a hopeful one, or the recession will be continue or even increase for the next couple of years?
Thank you. The forecast that I have read in order to prepare this material is that in the next 5 years we won't have a good growth performance in terms of economic growth. It will be difficult. In my opinion, especially because we are cutting public spendings, and so it will be very difficult to improve infrastructure or other things like that in order to grow. And I think that the government now is focused on cutting and adjusting the fiscal adjustment. So this is the focus now. I think that until we don't make these reforms and fiscal reforms, we won't give a step in order to improve this condition we are. And I think that I have read many forecasts, IMF and CEPAL, many ones. All of them say that 3-5 years of nothing or 1% of growth, economic growth, only that. The forecasts are not very good.
Hi, my name is Fernanda from Chile, and I want to know because just 1 or 2 years ago, I remember that many countries in Latin America and South America stopped buying meat to Brazil because there was, I don't remember, yes, a contaminated beef. So I want to know how did it affect to your economy that problem, because Chile is not a huge consumer, but it is one of the most stable countries in Latin America in economic terms.
It affected a lot, but the Brazilian authorities rushed in order to prove that it was not a big problem. I think my opinion is that it was not, there were not phytosanitary problems. I think it was a non-tariff barrier in order to stop the Brazilian meat going to there, because they have high qualities of safety in dealing with the meat. So I think it's a mix of political problems in the United States and European Union. They don't like that we export a lot of meat to these countries, and our meat competed with theirs, so they didn't like that, and they put these non-tariff barriers to our meat. But I think in 3 or 4 months this was resolved. They negotiated some things, and the companies adjusted their quality to the necessity the countries asked for. So I think it was not in terms of months, 3 or 4 months, if we consider United States and other country, but in the whole year I have read that it was not a huge problem. I don't know if I replied your question. Yeah, I think so. I think it was more political, because the company that was most affected is GBS, that I have mentioned here. Is a huge hub that produces a lot of things, and I think they have high standards of quality. They wouldn't have make a mistake, a huge mistake, in order not to have to reach the standards of the European Union or the United States. So I think it's a political problem that was resolved politically also.
You compare Brazil a lot with Argentina. I guess you talk about the successful between Brazil and Argentina. years ago, but actually, I guess that both are in a critical situation in an economic point, because Argentina nowadays have a huge decrease in economic, and I guess Brazil, it is not so bad, but you compare only the positive aspect between both. But what happened between Argentina and Brazil nowadays?
I think I compare more in terms of GDP and in terms of export market. But you're right. We are both suffering from economic problems. Perhaps Argentina are more related to, not exactly to political decisions, but also is more structural problems. But I think that we are complementary in terms of there are sectors that we compete, but there are other sectors that we have complementarity. So I think...
you mean for the quantity of people who live in Brazil and Argentina, population?
No, in terms of goods that we export for them. I think we export goods, some kinds of goods they don't have, or they prefer buying from abroad or buying from Brazil because our are more competitive.
What about Chile with raw materials? Because we are the principal ones in copper mine production.
Yeah, but I think Chile is more concentrated in some products to export. Yeah. It's for cobre.
Like Brazil, raw materials and exportation of wine, fruits.
Wine, what else?
Fruits.
Fruits, yeah. And what else also? Cobre.
Copper, fruits, and wine exactly. Are the principal. And I guess that tourism nowadays is very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Argentina and Brazil now, there are many sectors that compete, but there are many sectors also that are complementary. So that is why we have a good trade relations.
Do you think that the situation in Brazil, in Argentina, affect the economy in Brazil?
Sure. Argentina is the biggest importer of Brazilian cars, vehicles, for example. And due to this economic crisis there, the sales of cars decreased very much in Brazil in the last year and in the last 2 years. You're right.
Hi, thank you very much for this lecture. My question is about the future. What is going to happen to Brazilian economics if most of all natural resources runs out, and how is Brazil going to face this problem?
Do you mean Brazil or other countries? For
Brazil.
Brazil. As I have shown, I think that Brazil is one of the most important countries that is investing in renewable energy, other kinds of energy that don't depend on the petroleum and on oil. So we have also natural competitiveness in this kind of energy production because we have a lot of sugar cane or corn, and also waste that we transform in renewable energy. And also water. We have the biggest rivers in the world and can produce energy. And so I think that energy here in Brazil is getting more expensive, but it was not so expensive some years ago because we depend so much on water. Today there are some times that it doesn't rain enough. We have to use nuclear energy. That is something much more expensive to Brazil. And so our families are paying more in the period that doesn't rain so much here in the southeast, for example. That is this period in winter. It doesn't rain enough, so we pay more for energy this time of the year. June, July, and August. The government authorizes an adjustment of the price of the energy because we have to use more nuclear energy than water energy or the others. But we are increasing in, as I told you, aeolic, wind, also energy, or other kinds of biofuels that are also spreading in the Brazilian economy.
Another question is about what is the government doing at the moment to solve the problem of unemployment?
Latin America in general? Good question. A good question. I think that our last government invested a lot in technical education, because I don't know why in Brazil someone that goes to a technical school was not so valued as a person that goes to university. But as Brazil started growing, we realized that we have to have more technical labor because we have to, these people have to work on industries or do some technical services that most of people don't know. So we increased our investment in technical education. But I think that, particularly, I don't think that this government is so worried about the unemployment rate at this time. They are concentrated on political and economic reforms, and until this was not concretized, they want to initiate other types of policies. The policies are to mitigate problems, but not the structure of the unemployment.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, we have exactly. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, you can send me. I hope you also enjoy Ouro Preto tomorrow. Have a nice weekend and enjoy Brazil. Okay? Thank you.